What are timid Durin's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. To start, Durin has excellent Pyro Application. This means that anywhere where you're going to want to use Pyro, Durin is going to be an excellent sub-DPS to get the job done. This means that yes, he is able to actually act as a good alternative to Mavuika, and indeed is going to be an upgrade to Xiangling. This means that if you really don't want to use Mavuika, or if you don't have her, then Durin is going to be a more of a sufficient pull to get the job done. Going forward, basically anywhere where you're going to want Pyro Application, you're going to be able to use Durin, and it is going to be very strong. And as we know from how Xiangling absolutely had a grip on the meta for ages until Mavuika came out, Pyro Application is a very valuable thing to have, especially whenever you consider the Pyro-related reactions are extremely strong. Also, this helps loosen Mavuika's grip on the Pyro meta at least a little bit. That character is so absurdly strong right now that it's nice that we have an alternative that's able to challenge her a little bit. He's not replacing Mavuika on the whole, I should make that very clear. It's more that as a sub-DPS, he is going to be an excellent alternative. Not to mention that, since we're on this topic already, what else can Mavuika do aside from apply Pyro? That's right, she can also be a sub-DPS from off-field, and Durin can also do that. He's going to be able to provide a pretty nice amount of damage, to be honest. So not only are you getting really nice Pyro Application out of this guy, you're also getting good damage numbers. So because of that, he's contributing quite a bit to the team on the whole. All around, he's honestly a really well-rounded character. Anybody that's kept up with Genshin's meta for at least a brief period of time knows how good this class of character is. So if you want a nice upgrade to Xiangling and you just want a good 5-star Pyro sub-DPS, Durin is genuinely going to be an excellent pickup. Not to mention that, because his sub-DPS is honestly so solid, he's even able to be a main DPS himself. There's two teams in which you're likely going to be able to do this. There's going to be one with Mona considering the new Hexenzirkel mechanics, and there's also going to be one with Overload. So, if you want a good Pyro DPS and you don't have one already, well then Durin's actually not even going to be a bad choice for that. I will say that Mavuika is still going to be a stronger Pyro DPS, obviously. However, the fact that this is even something that you can do is impressive in of itself, because genuinely, his own damage is something to marvel at. All around, Durin is just a really high value character. Another thing is that he's also able to buff up Mondstadt units, and this is because of the new Hexenzirkel mechanics. Essentially, whenever two characters that are able to trigger Hexenzirkel buffs are in the team, you gain additional effects. If you're a fan of the Mondstadt cast, well then you're in luck, because this character is an excellent investment to make if you're interested in those mechanics. And let me tell you now, if you're a really long-term viewer of mine, like you've been around for quite a while, then you'll know that me and Venti go way back. So, to me personally, today was quite the surreal day. I never thought I'd see the day that we get Venti buffs, and I also never thought we'd see the day that we get a teammate for DPS Venti. Yes. If you are a big Venti enjoyer, very based by the way, then pulling for Durin is actually a really good choice in your case because you're able to use him as a support for your Venti. Because we actually unironically live in the timeline where DPS Venti is going to be an actual thing and he has Animo Infusion on his normal attacks. So, if that's something that you're interested in and you want to play that at its full potential, then you're going to want to pull for Durin. Holy guacamole, I never thought that we would see the day where that is a sentence that I would actually speak. But no, we are actually living in a timeline where not only has Venti been buffed, but all of the Mondstadt cast, for the most part, has been made relevant again. That is certainly something. I am quite impressed. This also spells good news for the rest of the Mondstadt cast. For instance, like I said, if you want to play Durin as a main DPS, well then you're going to want to pull out Mona, a character that hasn't really seen any relevance for quite a long time. This was honestly a really unique decision from Hoya vs. End, and I'm very, very happy that they decided to do this. Buffing the Mondstadt characters is something that I never thought that they were going to do, but no, it is an actual thing that we are seeing. Another thing is that if you're an Albedo fan, yes, Durin is actually going to make your Albedo somewhat relevant on your account. Now I should add that some of these characters obviously aren't suddenly going to become super meta, but they're becoming viable again, and that in of itself is quite relevant. So if you really, really like this cast, Durin is a great investment. Okay, but what teams would you exactly be using them in? Well, for example, the Durin Albedo duo could be a really nice alternative Navia team. Will it be our best in slot? Not necessarily, I doubt it. Shilunen and Mavuika is a really strong combo, but it's a really nice side grade. And yes, while I usually don't like to shed too much light on anything that isn't best in slot, Yeah, this situation is quite unique. I never thought that we would see the day where the Mondstadt cast, outside of Bennett, would become relevant again. And I really could not be happier about Venti buffs and Venti getting a new SIG. There is a lot to cover this patch. They really dropped quite a lot on us that I am very, very pleased about. But for now, I'll say this. If you want to make your Mondstadt characters shine again, have a look at the ones that are getting buffs. Pulling for Durin is going to be beneficial to basically any of them. I am definitely going to have a lot of evaluating to do, but really this is super nice, especially for anybody that has an older account and has a roster of older characters that they would like to pull out again, because while these characters you could cope with them here and there, Durin is properly bringing them back, and I personally expect that as the Notcry version goes on, it's likely that we're going to get more characters that are able to utilize these mechanics, thus making this cast even stronger. So all around, Durin is not only just a really healthy addition to any account because a Pyro Sub-DPS is just a great type of character to have on hand, and also he's just going to be able to fit into so many teams, and Pyro reactions are very powerful, but he's also going to be boosting up the performance of plenty of old characters that have not been shown love in literal years. We saw a Venti showcase in a Genshin livestream in 2025. This is certainly a strange timeline, one that I am very happy to be in, but strange nevertheless. However, we do need to talk about Durin's comms. Okay, so here's the really funny thing with Durin. His comms really don't outweigh his pros. They have straight up just made a really powerful unit here that is just a fantastic addition to basically any account. Durin is fantastic. I honestly couldn't recommend him enough. So, while I will briefly mention these cons and I will run over his issues, just to know that generally, no matter what your account looks like, he is a very powerful character and he is going to be a good addition basically no matter what. Yes, he does have specific situations in which you'd want him more than, say, other accounts, but for the most part, he's just generally really strong, and I think that you shouldn't take these cons to heart too much, because he is just kind of that guy. He is a really good character. However, I will add, he mostly does shine whenever you're leveraging these Hex and Circle buffs. You do ideally want to play him with one other Mondstadt character in the team. You don't have to. Don't be tricked into thinking that you have to. You can also just use him as a regular old Pyro Sub-DPS, and he's going to perform at that role just fine. In fact, he's going to perform at that role quite well. However, if you want the vast majority of his value, then you do ideally want to play him with the Hex and Circle buffs. This shouldn't be too hard, you have quite a few options at your disposal. However, if you're unable to do so, don't worry about it, it's not a deal breaker, you're still very much going to be able to utilize your Durin. However, if you want him to be at his absolute top potential, you do want to play him with at least one other Hex and Circle buffed character. It should also be noted that just because a character is from Mondstadt doesn't mean that they're getting Hex and Circle buffs. For example, Bennett and Eula are not receiving anything like this. They are outside of this buff range, so you want to make sure that you're using the Hex and Circle specific characters. And there are still quite a nice pool to choose from, including 4 stars, so don't worry, you will be able to put something together. Like in the Chevrolet Overload team, for example, you have Fischl there, and then in his own Vape DPS team, you have Mona, so you've got things to work with. And then of course, in teams like Venti DPS, well then you've got Venti there, so that sorts that out. All around, it should not be that hard to work around. And for the most part, you would likely be pulling Durin to buff those Mondstadt characters anyway, so it ends up panning out quite nicely. However, if you are just pulling him as a generalist Pyro unit, just keep in mind that he is best played with another Hex and Circle character. And another thing that I'd like to add is that he's not as strong as Mavuika. I don't really think that this is too big of a deal because they kind of deal in different best in slots. If you're pulling Durin as a sub-DPS, you're doing it to boost your Hex and Circle characters. If you're pulling Mavuika for a sub-DPS reason, well then that's because you likely play a Notlon DPS that's able to really benefit from having Mavuika as a sub-DPS on the team. So generally, I wouldn't really be too concerned about this. Now, when it comes to main DPSing, Mavuika is just going to be stronger. She is not only the strongest Pyro DPS, but she is literally the strongest DPS in the game at the minute, so Durin's just not going to be able to compete there. However, in terms of sub-DPS potential, I wouldn't really worry about this too much, because while Durin is not necessarily going to be doing the same work that Mavuika does, he does different kinds of work, and he can still very much replace Mavuika in teams where you'd want to use her. Specifically for the Pyro application. I will say that for specific Notlon units, like Kanich for example, yes, Mavuika does provide very specific things that he likes, and same for other Notlon DPSs that like Mavuika's specific benefits. But if you're mostly just using them for the Pyro application, well then in that case, Durin or Mavuika doesn't really matter, both of them are going to work fine. All around, Durin is a really strong unit. Like, he is super good. No strings attached, he is just super good. And unlike some of the other Notcry characters where they are good, but they come at the cost of really wanting another dedicated support in order to make them truly shine, Durin doesn't really have that. He can very much just be a self-sufficient pull on an account. I think he is honestly one of the highest value pulls out of all of Notcry so far. Out of the current roster of Notcry units that we currently have, I actually think that he is the most worth going for out of any of them. And if you're somebody that hasn't really invested into any Notcry DPSs up until this point, keep in mind that Durin is likely only going to get more teammates in the future, he's going to be very good on release, and he's also good for accounts that haven't really invested into Notcry at the minute. Columbina is likely going to be a very strong unit, but I imagine that she's only going to be good for Moonglare units if I was to place a guess. So if you're more for the Hexencircle teams, you may unironically prefer pulling Durin over Columbina, I'm just saying. So obviously we have to wait on that, maybe that's not going to end up being true, we don't have anything on Columbina yet. But I am pretty convinced that if you want to play the strongest possible Hexencircle teams, you're gonna want Durin by your side. He is a really well-designed unit, I'm very happy with him. Hopefully this video is able to tell you Durin's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice, signing out, and this has been a really interesting year for Genshin so far. If you told me that an event NPC creature was going to become a very powerful playable character in the future, I don't even know what I would have said to you, man.